streams. Oh, what about you, Facebook? Are you working? Inconclusive. Yes, now it's working. All right, so all of these streams are now working. Very, very nice, and welcome to a slightly earlier stream than usual. If it's too early for you to catch it live, you can always watch it on a VOD afterwards. I have to admit that today's story, I've been a little bit lazy, because this story, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and if you ask me to tell you a story, that's the story that I'm going to tell you. The one you'll hear in a minute or two. It is a story from Morocco. It is called The Red Lantern, or you can call it The Old Lantern, The Broken Lantern, or just plainly The Lantern. And I came across that story. Well, first of all, I started with getting interested in Moroccan stories when I was traveling in Morocco. And I have to make shout outs to an institution and a person where I encountered this specific story and other Moroccan stories. Let's start with the institution, which is the Café Clock, which exists in the city of Fez and in the city of Marrakesh. And the Café Clock is a sort of international cooperative cafe run by a Scotsman, I believe, with all Moroccan staff. And they try to maintain Moroccan traditions, among them very prominently the hikayat, the old storytelling, as it happened in Morocco, following a circle around you and telling a story. So they have younger storytellers who tell in Darija, the Moroccan dialect of Arabic, and in English. So if you go there, and they're planning to kind of expand on this after whenever they can open up again. So if you are going to Fez or specifically to Marrakesh, pay them a visit. The Café Clock. And the Café Clock is also where I encountered Richard Hamilton, a BBC journalist who is interested and fascinated by these old traditions of Moroccan storytellers. And he did, a couple of years back, he published a book called The Last Storytellers, which consists of retellings, English translations of the old traditional stories of Moroccan storytellers. And I met Mr. Hamilton in the Café Clock when he did had a reading of his book. Bought the book there. I haven't found it, otherwise I will just show it to you. It's called The Last Storytellers by Richard Hamilton, and it's a great resource for that, for Moroccan stories, if that's something that interests you. And perhaps after this story it might, who knows. This specific story was, I think, when I started telling this story, I realized what could happen, or how a story works on stage if you tell it to an audience. And here is usually where I lose people if I say that, but this story has a specific structure, specific rhythm, specific shape that works very, very nicely if you tell it. But you don't care about that, you just want to hear the story. So here it is, The Red Lantern. And The Red Lantern is the story of a man named Kadur who lives in the city of Marrakesh. He is a lowly sweet seller. And he's not a particularly good sweet seller, poor Kadur. In fact, he is constantly losing money. And one day he realizes that he doesn't even have enough money left over to buy the sugar and the honey and the flour that he needs to buy to make his sweets. And so he decides that he is going to leave the city of Marrakesh. He's going to leave it behind. He's doesn't want to face the shame of ruin, doesn't want to become a beggar. So he takes his meager possessions, which are basically the clothes that he wears, and an old broken down red lantern, this brass metal kind of lantern. If you put a candle or a source of light in it. It throws beautiful shadows and shapes on your walls. And he has one of these because these are the lamps, specifically the way they are made in the city of Marrakesh. And this is what he takes with him, and he goes up into the Atlas Mountains. Now, Marrakesh is in the desert, so you would imagine Marrakesh is very, very hot, and you'd be quite right with that assumption. But once you climb up into the mountains, the weather changes quite rapidly and gets very, very cold. And so Kedua, who has no plan at all how to cross these mountains, can only survive because of the charity and hospitality of the Berber people, the tribes people who live up there in these mountains, who invite him to spend the night, to warm himself up with some hot food or coffee or a tea. And it is only because of them that he doesn't freeze to death very, very quickly, because the nights, as I said, get very, very cold. So Kedua keeps walking across the mountains without any plan, until one day he realizes, the ground, it doesn't go up anymore. It levels, and indeed, in a moment or two, he's walking downhill. He's walking into a valley. He has crossed the first mountains. And in that valley, he sees from afar a city. And he is surprised and curious, for he has never seen that city before. He didn't know that there was a city there. Nobody has ever told him about that city. No traveler has written about that city or spoken about that city. But in front of the city gates, there are a couple of people. And Kedua slowly, cautiously approaches them. And he listens, and they speak to each other, and they speak the same language that Kedua speaks, very little bit of an odd dialect, but that can't be helped. It's a strange city in the mountains after all. So he says, "Good morning." And the people look at him, and they think, oh, it's a traveler, it's a stranger. Well, he speaks our language, but he has a little bit of a weird dialect, just as to be expected. He probably comes from way, way down in the valley. But they invite him in. "Come on in, meet our Pasha," they say. And they take him to the house of their Pasha. And the Pasha greets Kedua very warmly and invites him to stay in his house. And this house is marvelous. Kedua has never seen a house like this before. It's beautiful. And the Pasha invites him to sit and lie down on the softest cushions, and he snaps his fingers, and servants bring him the most delicious food and wine and tea and coffee that he has ever had. And beautiful and elegant musicians come and start to play beautiful music for Kedua. And he watches as they go around, and he sees a strange thing as the Pasha opens a cupboard to take something out. A handful of rubies and diamonds fall down on the floor, and the Pasha seems almost annoyed. It's like there's a bit of dust or dirt that has just fallen out, and with he pushes them underneath the cupboard, out of sight. So Kedua stays there, and in this weird, strange paradise, unexpected paradise, and he stays there for 3 days and 3 nights, for this is the requisite time. As it said in the Quran, if a guest comes, you shall harbor him and offer him your hospitality for 3 days and 3 nights. And after that, it is time for Kedua to leave again. But now he is in a predicament, because he has enjoyed this hospitality, he has tasted this food, he has slept on these soft pillows. And what can he give this man in return? This Pasha, who seems to have everything in the world. What indeed can he give to this man? And he thinks long and he thinks hard, and eventually he decides, well, it is the thought that counts, isn't it? And he takes his old battered red lantern, puts a candle into it, and he holds it out to give to the Pasha. The Pasha looks at it, and for a moment or two he seems puzzled. But then his face lights up, and he begins to smile and to laugh, for the flickering candle behind the broken glass is something that the Pasha has never seen. In this place, in this city, the people have never had glass. They drink out of iron or wooden cups, and their windows are boarded with wood. And now he sees the candle dancing behind the glass. He sees the reflection, the play of light and shadow, and he thinks that this is indeed the most marvelous, the most beautiful, the most astounding thing that he has ever seen. And he throws his hands up into the sky and he says, "Praise this stranger who comes to me, bringing me such marvels." But as high as his spirit rose in joy, it falls just as deeply down into a sort of consternation and shame, because this man, whom he gave just the required hospitality, was offering him such a marvel, such a wonder. And what can he give this man in return? He has, well, what does he have? He has gold, he has just a couple of measly rubies and diamonds that nobody would look at twice. What indeed can he give to this man who brought into his house one unseen marvel? And the Pasha is fighting with his conscience, and in the end he thinks, well, it is the thought that counts, and he says to Kadur, "I will give you a third of everything that I have, and I hope it is enough." And Kadur does not know what to say, and already the servants start loading up all sorts of valuables on the backs of donkeys. There's a whole caravan, and Kadur can just stand and gawp at it. He doesn't understand what's happening, and he is leading a whole caravan of donkeys through the mountains, down, back into Marrakesh. And there, with his newfound wealth, he buys a beautiful house, a whole compound at the edge of the city with fountains and peacocks and shades and date palms and orange trees, lemon trees, whatever you want. And he looks for a suitable woman to marry, and he marries a beautiful young woman who he also develops love for, and they live together in this house. And Kadur is happy, but that is not yet everything. For Kadur also has a brother, and his brother's name is Said, and when Kadur was poor and needed something, Said was nowhere to be found. But now Said has heard that Kadur has come into riches, unexpected riches, unimaginable riches. And so as soon as he hears this, Said knocks at Kadur's door, and his brother, who is kind of heart, who is welcoming to all, opens it and sees his brother, and he embraces his brother and he leads him in. And Said says, "Kadur, how come that you, who never had anything, now has such a palace? What happened?" And Kadur cannot believe that anyone would harbor any ill will in his heart, least of all his brother. So he tells him the entire story about the city, the Pasha, blah, 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 the whole thing. And Said thinks, if my brother got that much for a measly, broken, old, battered lantern, then what can I get if I go there with things that have real value? And he sells everything that he owns and buys things that he believes have real value, and he loads them on the backs of donkeys and sets out, following the trail that his brother had described to him. Now, in these mountains, the Atlas Mountains, there are not only Berber tribes, but there are also bandits. And when Kadur was passing through that, for the first time, he was protected by his poverty, for what do you steal from a man who has nothing? And the second time when he went through with his caravan, perhaps it was some supernatural force that was protecting him from those bandits. But Said, he has none of those protections. And the bandits fall on him, and they rob him, and they beat him half to death and leave him lying unconscious underneath an argan tree. After a while, Said wakes up, all bloody and swollen, and he's shocked. He goes through his pockets, and there is nothing at all there. The only thing that they left him was a broken old watch. Everything else the bandits took. And now Said is in despair, for what can he do? If he goes back to Marrakesh, then for the rest of his days, he will have lost his face completely. He would be the butt of jokes until the day he died. Nobody would take him serious or respect him. He had no choice but to push on. And say what you will about Said, the man certainly has strength of will, for he did not get any hospitality from the Berbers that live in these mountains, and yet somehow he managed, beaten and battered and broken and bloody as he was, to make his way across the mountain to find the exact same valley, the exact same city, the exact same gate that his brother had found. And he met in front of that gate perhaps the exact same people who also welcomed this second stranger, and the Pasha, who also welcomed Said and offered him not only the hospitality of his beautiful house, but also the help of the best doctors who came to him with smelling salts and salves and everything that he needed. And beautiful servants attended to him and gave him to drink and gave him food and gave him whatever he wanted, and he slept on very, very soft cushions. And for 3 days and 3 nights, Said rested and recovered in the Pasha's care. But those 3 days and 3 nights passed, and at the end of that time, Said was, well, close to heartbroken. He cursed the world and he said, what could I get if I only had my treasures to give to that Pasha? But yet I have nothing now. Nothing at all. I have to give him something, and the only thing I have is this broken old watch here. But I cannot do anything. I have to offer it. No, there's nothing to it. And so he stretched out his hand and he offered the Pasha the broken old watch. And the Pasha looked at it. And he puzzled over it for a while, and then again his eyes lit up and he began to smile. For the people there, they counted the passage of time by the sun and the moon's own passage across the sky. And now a stranger came and said that he held time in the palm of his hand, time, that creation of God, that mysterious creation, in the palm of his hand, in a tool, a mechanical apparatus that he gave now to the Pasha. And the Pasha could not believe his luck and his fortune, and he could not believe those insane, those crazy, those marvelous strangers that came to his house, to his city, and gave him all those magnificent gifts. And yet, as before, on joy followed shame and despair, for what could he give that had equal value to such a gift? Time in the palm of your hand. What could he give? But now he had an idea. He would give in return the most valuable gift that he himself had received, and he sent the servants down into the cellar where, in a beautiful locked cupboard, on a beautifully embroidered satin pillow, he kept the broken old lantern that he had received from Kadur. And he brought it up, they brought it up, he took it, and he gave it to Said, who had no choice but to take it. And on Said's way home, the bandits saw no reason to trouble him again. And that is The Red Lantern, a Moroccan story, one of my favorites to tell. A bit shorter, but I hope a little bit sweeter as well. Thank you very much for listening now, and thank you if you watch that later on. I'll probably be back next week after Christmas. So, well, if you celebrate Christmas or something else right now, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Earlier, don't know if I'll show my face before that, maybe afterwards, with another hopefully good story. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time,